on this computer and we are ready to go. Ayin Beis, Perek Lamed Aleph is what we're going to do tonight. And just to give a kitzer of what we started last week. So last week we spoke about three madregas, and the week before actually, three madregas in the Or Ein Sof. There's an Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. There's an Or Ein Sof as it's Nimshach, but not yet Melubash in Kalim. And then there's the Or Ein Sof that's Melubash in Kalim. The Islapshus the Kalim is really only in Atzilus. Even though there's an Inyan of Kalim, Al Kopanim, Kli Echad, in higher madregas in Atzilus, in the madrega of Akudim, Kulam Akudim Bekli Echad, right? There's one Kli, but that Kli is quantitatively different from the Kalim of Olam Atzilus. And the real Inyan of Islapshus in Kalim really begins in Atzilus on a very high madrega Kamuvan. And so that is what we spoke about 2 weeks ago. And then last week we brought a parallel concept to that on a sort of a lower madrega, not talking about the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, but talking about madregas in Ak and Atzilus. The first madrega in Ak would be Atik of Ak. And that Atik of Ak, by the way, is the Inyan of Reishis Hakav, right? The Reishis Hakav, Atik the Ak. The second madrega is Hamisnase miyamois oilam. In other words, he's lamaila miyamois oilam being the midois and the medida b'hakbola. He's lamaila mizeh, but nevertheless has a shaykhis to the union of yamos oilam. What's he misnase from yamos oilam, right? So therefore, it is shy to talk about the union of yamos oilam there. That's b'chidas arich. And the third madrega is, sorry, that's called, both of those madregas are called blima, or rather the second madrega is called blima. The first madrega is the Esesris Lagnuzos, the second madrega is called the Esesris blima. And then we come to the third madrega. The third madrega is Islabus Orba Kalim. And there the Kalim, Nasim Ke'erech Mahus HaKelim. I mean, saying the Oirois are Nasim Ke'erech Mahus HaKelim. In other words, in the Slapshus of the Or and the Kli has an effect on the Oir, and the Or takes upon itself, so to speak, the color of the Kli to some extent. And that's why, at this point, there's a possibility still of Achlifu Duchtayu, of the Oiros and Kelim swapping the Oiros of Chesed in the Kli of Gvura, and vice versa, because the Or is not yet fully malubash. As it's about to be mislabash in the Kalim, it can swap around. And we got a moshel for that, from Hillel and Shammai, but there are klal Hillel and Shammai are bechinas chesed, bechinas gvura, or bechinas din, bechinas rachamim. And how come is it that sometimes, on very rare occasions, but nevertheless, sometimes Hillel paskins lechumra and Shammai lekula, and the answer is that when what they received from their Rav, they both received equally from their Rav, and it was melubash generally in the kalim of Hillel bechinas chesed, rachamim, tahor, zakai, and so on. Masha'enkain in the kalim of Shammai it was the other way around. But nevertheless, since in the Shoirish from Shmaya and Avtalia, who were the Rebbeim of Hillel and Shammai, it was possible for the Svoras of Hillel and Shammai to be, let me just, it calls me 20 times a day, sorry about that.
Yet the Shorish and the Shama cannot be from both. It has to be more lean one towards the other. Is it, if it's the Shachlik for the Chaya, could it be that when that happens, it's not necessarily related to the Shorish?
It's not related to the Neshama necessarily. It's related to Oiris. It's related to Oiris. We're just giving an example of Hillel and Shammai, Makal from Shmai and Naphtali.
But what causes this to happen?
What causes it to happen? Yes. That's a very good question. A Giloi from a higher madrega. That's what causes it to happen. It doesn't happen on its own madrega by itself. That's an excellent question. And in fact, this Inyan is dealt with in a Maimer of the Friedrich Rebbe, I think in Achar Mos Kadoshim, this last week's parasha, if I'm not mistaken, either that one or the one before, in Tafshin Dalet, in Tafshin Hey. In any event, that's the reason for it, because there's a Giloi milamayla mihakelim. Okay, so not only can there be a achlifu duchtayu, but also the hiskashrus of the oiros in Or Ein Sof and he's skalulus shalahem, there he's skalulus, in other words, the or can be nichlal and it's makor, is also because of an or elyon, as he says it over here, in fact, hameir aleim ubahim, this or elyon is misgale upon them, and therefore lifts them up to a higher madrega where they can be. And the same thing kind of happens, you can see in our own lives when two kids are squabbling and the parent comes in, usually the squabble, hopefully anyway, the squabble will finish because the parent will be mayor and oyer on the situation, and therefore the kids will hopefully come to an equitable resolution of their issue. I say only hopefully because this is America and this is Tafshin Pei Aleph, but nevertheless, that's the way it should be. Okay. All right, Perek Lamed Aleph. V'hinei, Gimel Madregas Eilu, and Gimel Bechinas Nekuda Kav Shetach. These three Madregas.
Can you share with us the text?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Here we go. So these same three madregas that we mentioned before, which is Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and Or Ein Sof as Nimshach in Reish Zakav, and then the Or Ein Sof Melubash B'Keilim, or alternatively the Indian of the oil of Atik and Arich, and then the Or that's Melubash Atzilus. So those three madregas also have another parallel way of explaining them. By the way, I mention this very often to people who don't really know much about Kabbalah, that one of the inyonim in Kabbalah is from the word Kabbalah comes from the word hakbalah. Hakbalah means to make parallels between things. So you can see the parallels between things. There's Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, there's Chesed, B'Rit, Tiferes, and so on and so forth. All of these inyonim are obviously related. So too, in this particular case, these madregas, these gil madregas, are the three madregas of Nekuda, Kav, and Shetach. Now, when we talk about Nekuda, Kav, and Shetach, we could be talking about a lower madrega or than we were speaking about before, but not necessarily. Let's see how he explains it. The Nekuda who bechinas atzmis shelamala adayin v'bechinas hamshocha b'gilui. The Indian Nekuda does not have, as I think we know from mathematics and sciences, a Nekuda doesn't have any dimensions. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a Nekuda, right? It doesn't have cognates in the east, west, north, south, whatever it is. It's a Nekuda. It doesn't have any hispashtus. Just a point. And a point, correct me if I'm wrong, because my knowledge of mathematics and sciences is not anywhere near other people's. So if I'm using an analogy which is incorrect, please do stop me and correct me.
This is a theoretical point.
Yeah, it's a theoretical point, yeah. Then Nakuda doesn't have dimension. Let's put it that way. I think that's a better way to say it. Nakuda doesn't have a dimension, but doesn't have Amshocha, doesn't have Giloi, because it's non-dimensional. Come on, Nakuda's Yud, Sha'ema Dain is Pashtus Oirach V'Roichav. That the Yud is not mispashet like the other letters are mispashet. It's a Nakuda. And that's the way you write the Yud, actually. You write it as a Nakuda, and then only afterwards you put the thorn on top and the thorn on the bottom and so on. But it's written as as basically a Nakuda. In other words, the expansion of the letter Yud, if you would spell it out, it would be Yud Vav Dalet. So the Vav Dalet shows on the Inyan of the 6 sides of space, and the Dalet is the Inyan of Malchus. Vav is the Inyan of Chesed to Yosoid, and Dalet is the Inyan of Malchus. So even though we can spell out the Yud Vav Dalet and bring it into dimension, so to speak, as he says, Shu Oirach V'Roichav, the length. That's the Vav, and the Roichav is the Dalet. The Dalet is Roichav in the sense that it's the top bar of the Dalet is from one side to the other, and then the leg of the Dalet is the Inyan of Oirech as well. So Shahu Oirech v'Roichav Hakol Hu Behelem Adayin. It's still, yes, it is there implicitly, but it's still Behelem. It's not yet revealed that way. A Yud remains a Yud. So that's what the Yud represents, the inner Pshitus. In other words, mufshat from dimensions. So that's the first madrega, Nakuda. Now what about Kav? Kav, the Indian of Kav is Amshocha. And not only Amshocha, but Giloi. Yud, because it's so small, is not much begiloi. It's only the first point of giloi, but it's not really begiloi yet. How does it become begiloi? It's nimshach into a kav, right? A kav, a line, and he's going to explain this in two ways. It's still hamshocha hiyulis. What does it mean, hamshocha hiyulis? So the proper translation of hiyulis, I think, would be ethereal. It's an ethereal, because the word hiyuli used to be translated as the ether, right? Hiyuli. But hiyulis just means simply that it's not yet fully dimensionalized. It's not brought into Gashmias Mamish yet. It's on a state higher than Gashmias. For example, just to give maybe an incorrect example, but nevertheless an example that illustrates this, that I've used many times before. 1 + 1 equals 2. Now that's the formula of 1 apple plus 1 apple equals 2 apples. Now, when you're talking about apples, it's very concrete. You can see what it is. But 1 + 1 equals 2 is an abstract formula, right? It's 1x plus 1x equals 2x. So that kind of level would be called a level that's hiyuli. And I'm sure in mathematics it goes much further than that, much further than just the simple functions of 1 + 1. And I'm sure that when we get into computers, it goes even deeper. Like zeros and ones and electrical currents and so on and so forth. Okay, let's just leave it at that. That's called the inyan of hiyuli. Beyond,
You say possibility?
Yeah, possibility. Yeah, that would work. Even though the kav has details, and those details are in fact revealed, nevertheless revealed in a manner of pshitus, and they're revealed in a manner of achtus. So in other words, when you have a line, the line itself also doesn't really, it has a beginning point and an end point, but it doesn't have expansion in dimensions of space, so to speak. A line is, and again, someone could correct me
It's one-dimensional, not three-dimensional.
Right. A line is one-dimensional, not three-dimensional. That's a perfect way of putting it. Right.
A kav is made up of many nekudas, so we can also.
Yeah, he's going to speak about this in a second. Yeah. The inyan of oirech, length, is the inyan of giloi. Why? Because it starts off as a nakuda. It starts off from the nakuda, and then the nakuda is mispashet in the kav. So it starts off as a helem, and then it comes into giloi. The whole inyan of hamshoch zakav is hamshoch into giloi. So hakav emiyosh yesh bo pratim behis galus mikom makom haru b'chinas pshitus adayin u'b'chinas his actus. Right? It's still in a state of his actus. Hina inyan hakav b'derech klal u'b'chinas ha'oirech u'b'chinas ha'giloi. That's the inyan of Giloi. Omnam yesh b'zeh shnai ofanim. But there's two aspects of Giloi which he's going to speak about now. There's two aspects of Giloi in the Kav. One is more of a Seder Masudar, and the other one is, let's call it Bilti Seder. We'll see shortly. Ha'alef u'mashe prat echad, a thing comes from one level to the next, from the kuda, it's drawn into the kav, and then the kav is nimshach lamata mata mata from madrega to madrega. In other words, every nakuda in the kav is dependent on the previous nakuda. It sounds like blockchain kind of thing. In other words, the next link in the blockchain wouldn't be there if not for the previous link. You know, that kind of order. Like the seichel from a godel cotton, there has to be a tzimtzum because the godel cannot give over the way he understands it, but he gives over in an oifen masudar. He gives over one idea, which then leads to the next idea, which then leads to the next idea, and then eventually the cotton can understand it the way the godel understands it. So again, that inyan that is mashpia to the cotton, mislabesh b'moshel or be'eze inyan shehu, it's melubesh in a moshel, melubesh in something else, in some concept that the cotton can grasp. In other words, it's be'erech hamakabel, right? It's be'erech hamakabel. And we can understand from the moshel, then it's not so difficult for him to understand it in the nimshal. Yes, it may be that the Rav will have to teach him the skill of what's called hafshota, to abstract things from their to abstract things from their Gashmius cognates from the Gashmius in Yonim. That's a skill in his boinanus, essentially. But nevertheless, once the cotton can grasp the Indian commercial who, he could probably grasp it on a little bit of a higher level, and then a little bit of a higher level after that, and so on and so forth, until he grasps the whole thing. Right? In other words, at first, if we're starting from the level of the cotton, he's malbish the seichel in one inyan, which is then melubish in the next inyan, then melubish in the next inyan. All of these are levushim for the main thing, for the oyer, right? And that's the pirush in Shir Hashirim. Vayadaber Shloimoi Shloishes Alofim Moshel. Shlomo spoke out 3,000 masholim. Now you might think that there are 3,000. If you look in all the writings of Shlomo Melech, whether it's Koheles and Mishle and Shir Hashirim and Chulu, you don't really find 3,000 masholim. You don't find 3,000 masholim. Shloishes Alofim Moshel. You don't find. But the way it's explained in Chassidus is that the Chochmah of Shlomo HaMelech was so mufshat that he had to malbish every inyan in 3,000 masholim until you got to the 3,000th one when someone could understand it, and then from that they would have to be mafshit to the 2,999, then the 2,998, until eventually, if they could get there, they would get to Chochmah Shlomo Kamoshehu, which probably they wouldn't get to, but nevertheless, that's what it means. Shlosh Tzalofim Moshel. In other words, the mlubash in levushim in order to be able to understand it. Until even a makabel is on a low level, can understand it. And he brings it down from one level to the next until even a cotton can understand it. And this was one of the koiches of the Baal Shem Tov, that he was able to bring down the highest in Yonim into the very simple and straightforward concepts that had never really been done in the way that he did it, so that even Amaratzim could understand certain Yonim very deeply. In any event, that's one way of doing it. In other words, one levush, betoch the next levush, betoch the next levush, betoch the next levush, etc., so that the Indian comes down in many, many levushim. That's the Oifen HaEchad. V'Oifen HaBeis, how else is the Kavdim Shach? V'Oifen HaBeis, Hu Shakavu Rak Yizgalus HaPratim She'aba HaNekuda. It's the revelation of all the Inyonim, all the Pratim in that particular Nekuda, but not lo havas haprat lidah hasoga v'havona, but not bring it down to hasoga and havona, not bring it down to the kalim of Chabad, the kalim of havona v'hasoga. Kim rak havos v'yizgalus hapratim sheba nekuda. So all the pratim in the nekuda are kind of revealed there. Someone who's a chochem in his own right can understand it, but someone who is not has to work on trying to understand it. And to a certain extent, you could say that many of the Polish Hasidim used this oifen. They said over a word that couldn't really easily be understood, and their intention was not that you wouldn't be able to understand it, but they weren't going to spoon feed you. You had to lift yourself up to a madrega that you could understand it. Obviously, the Poshet Hasidim had to go to other Hasidim to try and get a pure. But in any event, this is another oifen in his galus. The first oifen in his galus is one thing's connected to the other all the way down, and this is just a giloy of all the pratim in the nekuda without bringing them down one after the other. So what happens then? The mamela gama pratim heim bechinas pshitus, bechinas hiyuli sadain. Each prat there is still in a madrega of hiyuli. It's not understood. It's not really in a kli. It's mufshat. It's a madrega of hiyuli, and therefore it's much more difficult to grasp it. And it gives a moshel for this, obviously. Like the Mishnah, you think you understand the Mishnah until you learn the Gemara on the Mishnah. Then you see you don't understand the Mishnah bichlal, right? The Gemara brings out all the pratim in the Mishnah and all the diyukim in the Mishnah, which a person just reading it like doesn't grasp it at all. You have to work on it, Horavanya, in order to get to the Indian of a proper understanding. The Gemara will explain this Indian in the Mishnah in from many different angles and with many different svaras and so on and so forth. Okay. It's a hisgalus of the way things are in Tershim. The Mishnah is hisgalus of the way things are in Tershim B'chsav, but in and of itself, it's not really hisgalus yet. It needs the Gemara in order to mefaneach, to solve the puzzle, so to speak, and to bring out the depths of the ideas that are going on in the svaras and so on. Okay, as we just said. I'm Makasha Mashkas Ayin Beis, which, if I remember correctly, was one of the Maimorim that the Rebbe Rashab said at the L'chaim or at the Chasana of the Frierdiker Rebbe. I think it was the L'chaim. I think anyway. Being a kav, so it says over there in that Maimer, in a kav. That from the connecting together of many different nekudos, you get a kav. Every madrega in that inyan is itself a nekuda. Akudim and nikudim. What's the difference between akudim and nikudim? About akudim, it says, the Arizal says, kulam akudim bekli achas, as we mentioned previously. In other words, we can't see the distinction and the relative, how will we call it, the relative madregas of each of the spheroids in akudim, because they're all kulam yachad. In other words, one doesn't have any priority over the other, as they are in akudim. That's akudim.
There's no iskalus.
Yeah. There's no hiskalus. That's true.
So it's still a darg of toe, like a higher darg.
No, the darg of toe is coming soon.
Well, no, I understood that the surely is toe, but I thought that the akudim also was sometimes explained as.
Yeah, he's going to explain it now. Yeah, he's going to say it now. Yeah. The akudim hu shayes ksarim shahena oiris atzmiyim. That's why they call ksarim, because it's oiris atzmiyim. They're not recognizable as individual entities. They're all bound together, but you can't distinguish one from the other. There's no way of distinguishing one from the other. Which is the Indian of Matoyu, but Nikodim, in other words, they come into Gilui with the or. The original oil with their original oil, but as individual entities, and therefore they can't amalgamate and they can't form a composite. So what does that mean, that they can't form a composite? Therefore, the spirits of Toyu are always depicted as one above the other or one below the other. Right? They're in a straight line because there's no structure of Yamin small ve'emtza, right? It's all, each nakuda is a nakuda on its own, and they don't mashpia one on the other. We're doing kazois who inyan akav, masha b'chibur, shemechibur nakudois rabim naas akav. From many nakudois coming together, naas akav, a kav is produced. Anu his galus ha'oiras within pshitus. The oil has come into Giloi, but Bebchinas Pshitus. And therefore, when we say that the Bebchinas Pshitus, they're not menuga to one another either. They don't contradict one another. In Nikudim. In Akudim, they don't contradict one another. Esa oil is Bekli Echad. Masha Einkein in Nikudim. Rak, but Nikudim, Haru Bebchinas Ampin Mispardim. There you get different branches. Right? In other words, each sphere is its own branch. In the kav, it's one Indian. They're all one actus. One is amalgamated with the next one in one way or another. And this is the difference. When it comes to be revealed as a metzius, in other words, as it is in olam hatoyu, which is in hanekudim, shu his galus liyos between his metzius, kamo ana emloich. Right, the Indian of ego, which is the Indian of Metzias, Ana Emloich, I'm going to rule. Right, not we're going to take care of this together, but I'm going to rule. the union of Olam HaTohu, Ana Emloich. Each sphere has Ana Emloich, and then they destroy the previous sphere as a result, right? Because you can't have Shnei Melochim Mishtamshim B'Keseh Echad, and therefore each one destroys the next one. Or alternatively, Sheizgalus Hu Rak B'Chinas Gilui Mina Etzem. The Izgalus of the spheres of Tohu is Rak B'Chinas Gilui Mina Etzem, Lo Lios B'Chinas Mitzias, Rak Izgalus Levad. Or it could be just a Hizgalus and not and not a Metzias. In other words, it's not yet the spheres of Nikudim. Kamo Chocham HaGodol, HaMagala Or Sichloi, Kamo Shu Etzloi, Shekol HaPratim Bayim B'Hafshota. That a tremendous Chocham, he'll say he's in Yonim, and they're B'Hafshota. They can't be understood by the Hamoin Ha'am. That's why he needs a Maturgaman. He needs someone who stands between the Rav and the Hamon Ha'am or the Talmidim that can translate it for them into their Kalim, right? Because he says everything by Hafshota. We don't recognize the various pratim and the chilukim, the differences between this situation, that situation, etc. Okay, as we explained already, emotional ba'or seichel mufshat. We brought a Moshel Or Seichel Mufshat. The Or Seichel Mufshat was the teachers of Hillel and Shammai, after Shmai and Avtalyon. That was Or Seichel Mufshat. Sheyuchal his arev im Or Seichel Hofri HaMufshat. Gamken kamo yuchulu. So as far as could go this way, could go that way. And both svaras are correct. It's not that one svara is not correct. It's just that you have to make a decision, practically speaking. Are we going to go according to this svara or according to that svara? But both of the svaras are emes. Why? Because that's the way they are. In the makor, they could go one way, could go the other way, and that's one of the very important functions of the chachomim in paskening halacha, that it's going to go one way and not the other way. In other words, when the chachomim pasken halacha, then forever that's the psak. It doesn't change afterwards. Of course, if the circumstances change, it can change, but in those circumstances, that's a psak. In other words, they bring it into some kind of concrete form by the psak din. So this is all coming from the kav. Even though the kav is on a lesser madrega than the nakuda, because the nakuda is the or as it is originally first b'hiskalus, and the kav is hamshocha from level to level downwards. So therefore, it's a miut. It's a miut lagabe nakuda. As explained in the tzimtzum of the this is not the tzimtzum harishon. This is the tzimtzum in the shorsha ha'oiros, that it's a quantitative tzimtzum, not a qualitative tzimtzum. The tzimtzum of shorsha ha'oiros is only it's less quantity, but the tzimtzum harishon is a different quality altogether. So, being in a tzimtzum b'shorsha ha'oiros lios nimshach spheros pratios. And this brings about the union of a reduction in the or. So therefore, the kav is a reduction lagabe the nakuda. Even though it's a reduction, a quantitative reduction, nevertheless, it's still b'chinas pshitus. B'chinas blima. Because once they become melubash in the kalim, not b'chinas blima anymore. Then they have a mahus.
It's still pshitus because that's the echos of it is pshitus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. והשטח הוא כמו שהאורץ מסלבשים בכלים, שנעשים בחינת אור, החוכמה ואור החסד, כפי מהוס הכלים כולו. And the final madrega then is called shetach. So there's nakuda, there's kav, and there's shetach. Nakuda is non-dimensional, kav is two-dimensional, or one-dimensional, and shetach is three-dimensional.
What is shetach? What is the literal translation?
Area.
Oh, area, okay.
Yeah, point line area.
Okay, so it's two-dimensional.
3 dimensions, I think. No, actually, maybe not 3 dimensions, maybe 2 dimensions. Yeah, probably.
Area is two-dimensional, at least in.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't have depth yet. I'm not sure.
And
that
it's
that's the case
one dimension more than kav, than the line.
I see. Okay.
I think you could say shetach has a width, a height, and a breadth and a depth. I think.
Then it's volume. Then it's not an area; it's a volume.
Yeah. Okay.
They call it area.
I'm not sure that we should be medayik in the scientific
okay.
over here, but I'm not sure. But I think you're right. Shetach is 2-dimensional. It's true.
Kav has an up and a down, doesn't it?
It has a beginning and an end. Yeah.
It's one dimension. It's line. It's
Yeah.
one dimension length.
Okay,
Yes.
so we're going to say Nakuda is no dimensional.
Correct.
And then
Zero
Kav is
dimension.
1, and then we're going to say Shatach is, okay.
Yeah.
2. Yes. Area is 2-dimensional. Yes.
All right. Now let me ask you something. What is time?
Time might be construed as as additional dimension, but it's like fourth dimension to the length, breadth, and width, width and breadth, whatever. So it's another dimension. You can say that it's
time
another
equals-
dimension, but it's not geometrical dimension.
No,
Well,
it's not
time equals
geometric, and it's
space.
only it's unidirectional. It doesn't go in both directions.
Well, time equals space. I mean, that's how we determine how long, we say if you have to walk, what is it? What's the?
Okay, a light year, you mean?
Walk
Okay.
18,
Yeah. Yeah.
No, there is a measure of distance, light year. So it's the distance which is equals to the to how much light travel in 1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah, in astronomy they use it.
Yeah.
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 in the Gemara, that's how we know what time is. How long we know what 18 minutes is, how long it takes to walk a parsa. Right? What it says.
Yeah. 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 In a simple sense, that's correct. Yeah. Time is measurement of space. Yeah.
Yes, but it's not only measurement of space, because I remember when Moshe Zalman Olive moved to Jerusalem and asked him how far away he is from Kotel. He said about 20 minutes. He said, wait for 20 years, it will be 30 minutes. So it's it's not a distance.
Well, that's because he walks slower.
Right. So it's not just dimension. It's not just a measure of
Well,
distance.
no, you could
it's a
say
measure
it's
of
a- you
distance
could-
if the speed is fixed.
You could say it's a relative measure of space.
All right. But anyway, what
Relative to
shetach
the
and
number of
what shetach in Chassidus? Shetach hu kmo sha'oretz mislabshim b'kelim shenasim between its or hachokma or chesed kfi muhus ha'kelim. So they're melubash in kelim, and that would seem to me that if they're melubash in kelim already, we're probably talking about more than just two-dimensional l'chayra. I don't know, but it's a good question. They're not like, they don't have the same pshitos as the oiris themselves before they're in the kelim. He's supposed to biyah, they can bring about the creation of biyah, kfi oifen hakelim, kfi oifen hakelim. Okay. והדוגמה בזה, where is it? והדוגמה בזה יש לומר, כמו באצילוס רוחו של מוישה על הזקנים, when Moshe Rabbeinu was emanated his ruach upon the zakenim, that's where the word atzilus actually comes from Vayatzel Moshe is ruach al zakenim, right? That's where the lotion of atzilus comes from. In other words, what was that exactly? Hare alideshen nach al zakenim hayayachol yos hashpos habasar. Moshe Rabbeinu himself could not be mashpia basar. He was on too high a madrega. He could not be mashpia basar. Lechem loch, arbayim yoim lechem locha, v'mayim lo shasa, and so on and so on. Moshe Rabbeinu was like he was on a different planet, right? Spiritually, so to speak. But when it went through the Shivim Zakanim, then it was possible for them to be mashpia basa, which the people needed. Moshe himself couldn't do it. Moshe himself couldn't do it. Now, when it says that he couldn't do it, it's like, had he been able to do it, with Tata de Satra, would have a contradiction. Why? Because he would have had to be on the Madrega where he was Pel Per Diber Imalokim, right? Pel Per Adaber boy. At the same time, he would have had to be a mamutza to bring down the hashpah to the level of the people, and that was just not. It's not possible for a human being to be on those two madregas together all the time. So therefore, he had to have the Shivim Zakainim to bring things down to their madrega.
But don't we say that the greatness of the Rebbe is that despite being in a very high madrega, he could relate to every Jew, to every human being. So that's the Mila.
Yeah.
He would deny that to Moshe Rabbeinu. Would say no, he couldn't do that.
Right, right. And we would have to say probably that over the process of time, the true leaders of Bnei Israel have been able to relate in one way or another to the Amcha Yidden over a process of time. Now it could just be, you could argue that maybe because they weren't a lower Madrega. I don't think so, because someone is a Moshe Rabbeinu in that generation, right? So
yeah, it's interesting that it's specifically Yeshua is that is a ruach, Isha sheruach bo, that's underlined that he has that. It seems like Moshe Rabbeinu almost like doesn't have that.
Right. And I would also say that to be chutzpahdik about it, I would say that was before Hasidus. And it was only after these galus, and I don't mean it really in a chutzpahdik way. There's a lot of emes to that. That the Baal Shem Tov was a new his galus of Orein Sof that had never happened before. In fact, when I finish the work that I'm doing now, various things that I'm writing for various people, I want to actually do an essay on that particular thing. What was the chidush of the Baal Shem Tov, legabe the Arizal and legabe the Zohar? And there's some very, very interesting inyonim from Yitzhak Isaac Mihomel and various others who go into this issue. But in any event,
you have the book Hashiflis Vasimcha.
Yes, that's where it is.
Okay, good.
I think in the second parak, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That's where it is, yeah.
Mhm.
I took from the way it was upon you and I put it upon them. There's two inyonim here. The first inyan is Atzilus Ruchoi Shel Moshe. That's the first inyan. Masha Nach Al Zakainim is the second inyan. It's two different inyonim. In other words, first is the Hamshocha from Moshe, and then there's the Hislabshus on the Zakainim or in the Zakainim. And I'll explain. V'hainu the Ba'atzilus Ruchoi Shel Moshe Lavad. Agam shezeh Yerida mimadrega. So even though it was already a Yerida, once it's Nimshach from Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not inside of him, so to speak, anymore. It's already Hamshocha. It wasn't possible for there to be Hashpos Basar. Ki aladesha nach al zakenim shayu ba'en aroch legabe Moshe. That they were ba'en aroch lower than Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why the Hashpos Basar had to come through them. And that's why it had to come from the Ruach Moshe Rabbeinu. The truth is that the Zakenu couldn't have done it themselves either, right? The Zakenu, even though they were on the level that they could be mashpia, but first they had to be makabel from Moshe. They couldn't do it on their own. They didn't have the oil that Moshe Rabbeinu had, that they would have to then process that ore, so to speak, and then give it over to the people. They didn't have that ore from themselves. And that's why even Yeshua, who became the successor to Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that Moshe was Panav Kepnei Chama, and Yeshua was Kepnei Lavona, right? He was more like the Lavona, in other words, the reflected light. And that was for sure true of all the Zakanim. They were a reflected light from Moshe Rabbeinu, not an original light. Okay. And let's continue. Only the Moshe Dafka, all the Hashpos had to come through. So too, with the Hashpor from the Esesphiris like Nuzois, that has to go through a certain process in order for it to be Nimshach Lamata. If it's Nimshach Kamoshe Hu, right, it's never going to be Malubash in Kalim, and it's never going to have any effect on the world. Because even though it's Nimshach, it's still in an aspect of Blima. And Blima is not going to come down to Oires Malubash in Kalim. Therefore, it couldn't yet be a Makor for Biyah. It had to be Malubash in the Kalim of Atzilus first. And that was the work of the Zakainim and the various madregas of spheroids in order to be able to get to that inyan. They came to the inyan of Metzias so that they could be the makor for biyah. Since biyah is the Indian Metzius, therefore they had to come to that Indian. In other words, through the Indian of Chitzonius Kalim. As Alter Rebbe says in Perek Chof in Gerus HaKodesh, the Iuva Gamoy Chad, right? Iuva Gamoy, Garmoy is the Indian of causations. It's the Indian of the Kalim essentially. That is Misyached in the Kalim Livroi Bahen Yesh Mi'ayin. That excuse me, what comes about, the Indian of Yesh Mi'ayin comes about through Iva Gamoy, but not through Iva Chayoyi. Iva Chayoyi is the Indian of Oiros, and that's completely Davuk, or Davuk B'Ma'or, and that's not Shaykh to be Nimshach.
And so that EOI, so there's two different EOIs.
Yes, that's
that
two different EOIs. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, the person who speaks mostly about this, as far as I remember, is the Rebbe Maharash in Tafresh Mem, Mamorim in Tafresh Mem as a whole.
So what's the madrega of the lower EO? Is it more the Kab than the Nakuda? Is it more the Kab than the Rishima? I mean, it has to have a madrega.
Let's put it in simple Lashonos. The Ihu v'Chayoyi is as the oil is looking up to its shoirish, right? And it's davuk to its shoirish. That would be the Ihu v'Chayoyi. The Ihu v'Gamoyi is when it's looking downwards towards the Kalim. It's a different tnua in the mashpia.
It's like mati v'lo mati, maybe.
So again, mati v'lo mati.
Yeah, is it like mati v'lo mati, maybe?
I think that's what the Rebbe Maharash says. Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's mati v'lo mati. Yeah. The mati is the hamshocha, and the lo mati is the ha'aloa. The opposite of Ratzah B'Shof. Kitzer. Who in the Nakuda Kav Shetach, Nakuda he ha'atzmius v'shorshei ha'oiros, the roots of the oir, Kav, who is Galusan, the Tzimtzum, the spheres Pratiois, the Bechinas Nakudas Pshutois v'hiyuliois. Right, there's still Bechinas hiyuli. Kamo olam Nakudim, Rak Sham is Galus Yod between the Metzias. So there's some parallel between them, but nevertheless, the Indian of Oilam Toihu is the Indian of Bechinas Metzias Mamish. Ubakav, who Liois Bechinas Gilu Mea Etzem. The Kav is just a Gilu Mea Etzem. It's not a Gilu of the Etzem, it's Gilu Meha Etzem. An important distinction to make. Huinyan Shakav Asrim and Nekudois, and that's what we mean when we say the Kav is comprised of Nekudois, right? Each Nekud is connected to the next one, and until eventually it comes down to the Madrega, that it can be Melubash. Vashetach hu tvisas ha'oires b'kailim. Then the Indian of Shetach is when the oil is already taka Melubash in the Kailim, shenazim mitzias chochma v'chesed chulu, that actually becomes spheroids that are recognizable individually. The Indian of spheros chochma, spheros chesed, and so on. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're done. Any questions?
Well, I'll ask one if nobody else is asking.
Go ahead.
All right, no, just a little. I don't get the connection with the Nekudim. Nekudim being, it's not part of the Kav. It's the next Madrega. It's not asked after the Kav. He's using it as an example to compare to the Kav because there's Metzias. I don't get it because Nekudim is. I'm sorry, I didn't get really the point of the Tohu, that aspect where there's no Eskalus, everything is individual. There are Metzias, but it's a big difference between what a Kav is. A Kav is Peshitnus, low Metzias. Yeah. So what's the comparison here with Nekudim again?
All right. What we're doing is we're making parallels between what we spoke about in previous prokim, which is Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, right? Or Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum, and then Or Ein Sof as Melubash in Kalim. Those three madregas, Yachid Echad Kadmoin. That's what he called it before, right? Yachid Echad and Kadmoin. That same pattern takes place on a lower madrega, where we're talking about the Kav is comprised of Nekudois, but the Nekuda, Kav Shetach are three different madregas in the oil. Nekuda is when Nekuda Hiyulis. Kav is when those Nekudas Hiyulis are Nimshach, but they're not Nimshach necessarily. No, there are Nimshach one from the other. There's two ways in which they can be Mizgale. One is that they have Nimshach one from the other, and that's what makes it a line. but it's still not yet able to be melubish in kalim. That requires the inyan of shetach. Now, when we take it to a lower madrega, and we're talking about the inyan of akudim, nikudim, and brudim, that's the same pattern exactly. It's the same pattern exactly, except on a lower madrega. Akudim is all the spheres in one kli, and therefore that's not possible to distinguish between them. They're completely behiskalulus. All right, esa oiras bekli echad. And you could ask the question, how can you say esa oiras if they kulam behiskalulus? Practically speaking, they kulam behiskalulus, even though each one could be identified individually by the one who created them, but not necessarily by us. Okay, so that's akudim. Then nikudim is already hamshocha from a much lower madrega from nikudim, where each inyan is an independent inyan and is not really connected to the other inyanim. That's why it's pictured as a line rather than the spheres are in a straight line rather than as three kavim. Now in brudim they come into the inyan of three kavim, where the so the difference between them is essentially this. It gets a little bit more complicated, but essentially the difference is this. When you're talking about the Or of Chesed, let's say in Olam HaTohu, the Or of Chesed doesn't really have an Inyan of Gvura. The Or of Gvura doesn't really have an Inyan of Chesed. Now, the Amar Morim, where it says there is an Inyan of Chesed in Gvura and there is an Inyan of Gvura in Chesed, but what it doesn't have is Chesed Sheba Gvura Sheba Chesed. That's what it doesn't have. It's 3 dimensions. But let's make it simple. Let's keep it simple. Let's say the Oiras of Toihu are only the Or of Chesed in a Kli of Chesed, and Gvura is the Or of Gvura in a Kli of Gvura, and therefore, whenever the twain shall meet, they can't really relate to each other. They can't relate to each other because Gvura and Chesed is just not. Therefore, Vayimloch Vayamos, because there was no Hiskalulus at that point in time. Only when it comes into Elam HaBrudim, which is the Inyan of Elam HaTzilus, then there's Hiskalulus. In other words, the sphere of Chesed can find the Inyan of Gvura within itself, the Inyan of Gvura can find the Inyan of Chesed within itself, so to speak, and therefore they can find some common ground and work together in that way. I would say that if you want to understand it even clearer, just look at politics today. I tell you completely. One can't speak to the other, each one's an individual, no one's listening to anyone else, and the result is Olam HaTohu Mamish. I'll probably get banned.
It's a parallel, but it seems like there's a lower madrega. In other words, there has to be a mashpin makabel by
yeah, you're right. You're right.
By nikudim, whereas by the kab there's no makabel yet.
You're right. I mean, there's 3 different paradigms, and each one is lower than the next. You're right. Yeah, but that's the way he starts to explain things and bring it closer to our seichel, so that we can understand it how it is in the makor.
Okay.
All right, Rabbi Sa, I will put it up on the website, and Chassidus Decoded on YouTube. All right, sei gesund, and we will see each other.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Eliezer.